In June 2025, bottles of Logan Paul and KSI's Prime Hydration were selling in UK supermarkets for 31 pence. 3 years earlier, those same bottles were selling on resale sites for £1,200, and parents were paying those prices without hesitation. Prime wasn't just a successful drink, it was a $1.2 billion brand, the fastest growing beverage company in modern history, sponsoring the UFC, Arsenal FC, Barcelona, and WWE at the same time. It seemed unstoppable. Then, on August 2nd, 2023, a document landed in a California federal court. What that document contained and why almost nothing changed after it became public is the story Prime would rather you never heard. To understand how Prime got to 31 pence, you have to start at the beginning. Not with the drink itself, but with the two people whose names made it worth buying in the first place. Logan Paul launched his YouTube channel in 2013. By 2022, he had 23 million subscribers and a professional boxing career that had generated more media coverage than most actual champions. KSI, Olajide Olayinka Williams Olatunji, had built a parallel empire from the UK side. 23 million subscribers of his own, a music career with charting singles, and a rivalry with Logan Paul that had, by a particular kind of internet logic, made both of them more famous than if they had simply been friends from the start. They fought each other twice. The second fight, in November 2019, drew 1.3 million pay-per-view buys. When they announced they were going into business together, the combined audience watching that announcement was larger than the population of most European countries. Prime Hydration launched on January 8, 2022. Logan Paul posted on the same day that all stock had already sold out. That was not marketing language. The shelves were genuinely empty within hours. What followed over the next 18 months was the kind of growth that beverage industry analysts described as having no modern precedent. By the end of 2022, Prime had generated $250 million in retail sales, a figure that Gatorade, which had been in the market since 1965, took years to reach. Bloomberg reported in late 2023 that Prime was tracking toward $1.2 billion in annual sales, a projection that, if accurate, would make it one of the fastest consumer product launches in recorded history. The marketing strategy was not complicated. Logan Paul and KSI were the product. Every bottle carried their names and their photographs. Every launch was a content event, and every limited edition flavor was a scarcity drop engineered to produce the same psychological response as a sneaker release. When Prime signed with Arsenal Football Club in 2022, the announcement reached more people through the founder's social media than through the club's own channels. The UFC partnership followed in January 2023, making Prime the official global sports drink of the world's largest mixed martial arts organization and displacing a previous sponsor in the process. FC Barcelona came next, then the WWE. By mid-2023, Prime's branding was visible in more major sporting venues simultaneously than almost any beverage brand outside of Coca-Cola. The product itself was positioned as a healthier alternative to traditional sports drinks. Lower sugar, natural ingredients, coconut water, electrolytes. The marketing language emphasized what Prime was not: artificial, loaded with unnecessary additives, the kind of drink that came with a compromise. It was none of these. Families bought it at Walmart and Target and Tesco because the people on the label were people they trusted, and the promise on the label was one they wanted to believe. While Prime was signing those sponsorship deals and breaking sales records, a separate set of documents was already in motion, not from a competitor or media investigation. It was from Prime's own bottling partner and from a federal courthouse in California. In early 2023, Prime Hydration and its procurement partner Congo Brands entered into a significant contract with Refresco Beverages, a bottling company that agreed to establish a dedicated production line for Prime at its facility in Truesdale, Missouri. Refresco invested in custom equipment. It retooled its operations around the projected volume Prime had committed to, an initial projection, according to court documents, of 55.5 million cases within 3 years. Those projections were built on the sales numbers Prime was posting at its peak, and at the time, they did not look unreasonable. The projections did not hold. As 2023 progressed, Prime's sales trajectory began flattening in ways that were not yet visible publicly, but were already apparent in order volumes. By early 2024, Refresco filed a lawsuit against Congo Brands and Prime Hydration, demanding $67 million in compensation. The lawsuit alleged that Prime had repudiated the agreement and moved away from the Refresco facility after Refresco had already committed the capital expenditure the contract required. The production line Refresco had built specifically for Prime sat idle. The lawsuit is documented in federal court filings. Prime's position, as stated publicly, was that no such commitment had been made. The Refresco lawsuit was a business dispute between two companies, and by itself it told one kind of story, a story about projections that didn't materialize, and a contract whose terms were disputed. The document that told a different kind of story entirely had been filed 6 months earlier, in August 2023, in the Northern District of California. On August 2nd, 2023, a California resident named Elizabeth Castillo filed a class action lawsuit against Prime Hydration. The lawsuit's central claim was that independent third-party testing had found the presence of PFAS, per- and polyfluoroalkyl substances, in Prime Hydration's grape-flavored sports drink. PFAS are synthetic chemicals used in a wide range of industrial and consumer products. They do not break down easily in the environment or in the human body, which is why they carry the designation forever chemicals. The EPA, in the same period this lawsuit was filed, was moving to establish the first federal limits on PFAS levels in drinking water, describing their removal as a public health priority. The Castillo lawsuit alleged that independent testing found PFAS levels in the grape flavor of Prime Hydration at concentrations nearly 3 times higher than the lifetime advisory limit the EPA had established for drinking water. 8 PFAS compounds were identified in the testing: PFBS, PFDA, PFDOA, PFHPA, PFOA, PFUDA, PFTEDA, and PFOS. The lawsuit sought $5 million in damages and alleged that Prime had marketed its drinks as healthy hydration products containing beneficial ingredients, while the presence of PFAS had not been disclosed on the label or in the marketing. Prime's response, delivered through Logan Paul publicly, was that the claims were baseless and that the testing methodology was flawed. Paul stated that any chemicals identified referred to the bottle materials rather than the liquid inside, and that the packaging complied with FDA regulations. Prime did not issue a recall, and neither did not change the product label. And so, the marketing continued. 3 days after the PFAS lawsuit was filed in California, a separate regulatory action was announced in Canada that Prime has never addressed in comparable detail. Health Canada determined that Prime Energy, the caffeinated version of the product, distinct from the hydration line, exceeded Canada's acceptable caffeine limit of 180 milligrams per serving. Each can of Prime Energy contained 200 milligrams of caffeine. Health Canada announced a recall. The product was pulled from Canadian shelves. In the United States, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer had already written to the FDA in July 2023, urging the agency to investigate Prime's caffeine content in its energy drinks, describing the marketing as pushing what he called a cauldron of caffeine toward consumers who may not have been aware of the concentration they were purchasing. The speed of Prime's rise created a specific problem that the beverage industry had not encountered in quite this form before. Traditional drinks companies spend years in regulatory review, consumer testing, and distribution negotiation before a product reaches national shelf space. Prime bypassed most of that timeline, not through regulatory shortcuts, but through a distribution mechanism that had no historical precedent in the drinks market. Logan Paul and KSI did not need a marketing budget. They were the marketing budget. Every video, post, or appearance was simultaneously content for their existing audiences and advertising for the product those audiences were about to be offered. The separation between the creator and the commercial product they were selling was, by design, invisible. That invisibility was the strategy. Congo Brands, the Louisville, Kentucky-based parent company that holds 60% of Prime and manages the operational side of the business, had existing infrastructure from other influencer-aligned brands, including 3D Energy Drinks and Alani Nu supplements. The Prime launch was not Congo Brands' first experience with creator economy product development, and the distribution relationships with Walmart, Target, and GNC that put Prime on national shelves within months of launch were built on that existing infrastructure. What Congo Brands provided was the operational capacity. What Logan Paul and KSI provided was the demand signal. Neither element alone would have produced what happened in January 2022. Together, they produced something the industry had not seen, a beverage that achieved national distribution and cultural saturation simultaneously, before the normal feedback mechanisms of the market had time to operate. Those feedback mechanisms, consumer complaints, independent testing, regulatory review, media scrutiny, did eventually operate. They operated on the timescale they always operate on, which is measured in months and years rather than in the hours it took Prime's first production run to sell out. The PFAS testing that produced the August 2023 lawsuit was conducted by an independent laboratory hired by plaintiffs' attorneys. It was not conducted by the FDA or a government agency. It was conducted because a private individual decided to pay for it. The system that was supposed to catch what the independent testing found was not absent. The FDA exists. The FTC as well. The Northern District of California also exists. But it was operating on an institutional timeline, while Prime was operating on a social media timeline. And those two timescales are not compatible in ways that the Prime case made unusually visible. Senator Schumer's letter to the FDA was dated July 2023. The FDA's public response was that it would review the matter. 18 months later, in January 2025, a new lawsuit alleged that Prime Energy had understated its caffeine content on labels, a separate allegation from the 2024 caffeine case, filed by different plaintiffs with different testing data. The FDA's position on Prime's U.S. products, as reflected in the public record available in early 2026, remained unchanged from its July 2023 statement. The FDA responded to Schumer's letter by stating it would review the matter and respond to the senator directly. No public enforcement action followed in the United States. Prime Energy remained on U.S. shelves with its label unchanged. The caffeine question produced its own separate class action lawsuit in April 2024. A New York plaintiff named Lara Vera filed suit in the Southern District of New York, alleging that independent testing commissioned by her attorneys found Prime Energy drinks contained between 215 and 225 milligrams of caffeine per can, not the 200 milligrams advertised on the label. The lawsuit cited the equivalent caffeine content as approximately equal to nearly two 12-ounce Red Bulls and sought $5 million in damages on the basis of misleading and deceptive practices. Schumer's earlier letter to the FDA was referenced directly in the filing. By this point, Prime was managing 4 simultaneous legal actions: the PFAS class action in California, the caffeine mislabeling class action in New York, the Refresco $67 million breach of contract suit, and, in July 2024, a fourth. The United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee filed suit against Prime Hydration, alleging that the brand had used trademarked Olympic phrases, including references to Team USA, in its product packaging and advertising campaigns without authorization. The USOPC alleged that Prime had been notified and had ignored demands to cease use of the trademarks before the lawsuit was filed. Prime's UFC partnership had featured Kevin Durant as an ambassador, and the Olympic trademark issue arose from how that partnership had been marketed during the period surrounding the 2024 Paris Games. Logan Paul's public posture throughout this period was consistent. He described the lawsuits as baseless. He appeared on the Impulsive podcast to address the PFAS claims specifically, calling the science behind them flawed and asserting that Prime's products were safe and compliant with all applicable regulations. KSI made no comparable public statements on the legal proceedings. Neither founder acknowledged any change to the product's formulation or labeling in response to any of the 4 actions. In April 2024, a motion hearing in the PFAS case resulted in the court documents from the August 2023 filing becoming fully public. The test results, the PFAS compound identifications, the concentration levels, all of it entered the public record at that point, 18 months after the original lawsuit had been filed. The information had been available to the court since August 2023. It became available to anyone with a Pacer account in April 2024. By August 2025, the PFAS class action had survived 2 rounds of motions to dismiss. The court struck 9 of Prime's 15 affirmative defenses and allowed 6 of the 7 plaintiff claims to proceed. The case entered discovery, the phase in which both sides exchange evidence and expert reports. As of early 2026, no settlement had been reached. The caffeine mislabeling case remained in its preliminary stages. The Refresco suit remained unresolved. The USOPC trademark case had not reached trial. By the time the FDA had received Schumer's letter, Canada had issued a recall, and 3 separate class action lawsuits were moving through federal courts. Not one of those proceedings had produced a single change to the product label in the United States, and not one had resulted in Prime being pulled from American shelves. What finally changed the number on the price tag was not a regulator and not a judge. It was the market. The sales data that began emerging in 2024 told a story the sponsorship announcements had not. In the first quarter of 2024, UK sales of Prime fell 50% year over year, from £26.8 million to £12.8 million. By mid-2024, that figure had deepened to a 70% annual decline. Companies' house accounts filed for the full year 2024 showed UK turnover at £32.9 million, down from £112 million in 2023, a fall of 71%. UK profits collapsed from £4.4 million to £940,000. In the United States, Circana food data, cited by sports business journalist Darren Rovell, showed Prime sales down 42% year-over-year in 2025. Some market analysts, examining regional data, suggested the decline in certain markets was steeper than 90%. By June 2025, major UK retailers, including Tesco, had moved Prime stock to clearance sections. The 31p price point was not a promotional discount. It was what the market was willing to pay. The structure behind Prime's collapse is worth examining separately from the legal proceedings, because the two stories are related but not identical. The lawsuits documented what was allegedly in the product. The sales data documented what happened when the product lost the one thing that had made it worth £1,200 on a resale site: the perception that it was exclusive, endorsed, and credible. Those three properties were not inherent to the drink. They were properties of Logan Paul and KSI's audiences, temporarily transferred to a bottle through the mechanics of influencer marketing. When the legal proceedings entered the public record and the media coverage that followed began accumulating, the transfer went into reverse. The audience that had made Prime unstoppable was the same audience processing the headlines about PFAS, caffeine levels, and federal lawsuits. The brand had no independent credibility to fall back on, no decades of sports science research, no third-party institutional endorsement that existed separately from the founders. What Gatorade had taken 50 years to build, Prime had borrowed in 18 months. Borrowed credibility returns to its source when the conditions change. Congo Brands, which holds a 60% stake in Prime Hydration, with Logan Paul and KSI each holding 20%, announced a strategic review in response to the declining numbers. The company launched Prime Ice in early 2025, described in its press materials as offering the same hydration with a lighter, more refreshing taste. Prime Ice's sales figures have not been made public. The company described the launch as a testament to its continued product innovation. The institutional question the Prime story leaves open is quite unique and unresolved. The FDA received a senator's formal request for investigation in July 2023. The agency's public response was that it would review the letter. No enforcement action against Prime's US products has been documented in the public record. The standard governing what a creator-founded brand can claim about its products and what disclosures are required when independent testing finds something the marketing does not mention is the same standard that governs any consumer product company. The Federal Trade Commission enforces truth in advertising requirements. The FDA oversees ingredient safety and labeling accuracy. Neither agency has, as of early 2026, taken documented public action against Prime Hydration's US product line. What the Prime story reveals about the infrastructure of creator economy brands is not a verdict on Logan Paul or KSI as individuals. Both founders built something that genuinely did not exist before. A beverage company that went from zero to $1.2 billion in annual sales in under 2 years, funded entirely by the trust their audiences had placed in them over a decade of content. That achievement is in the documented record alongside everything else. What is also in the documented record is that the regulatory mechanisms designed to govern what goes into a consumer product and how it is labeled operated on a timeline that had no relationship to the speed at which a creator economy brand can reach scale. Prime was in the hands of millions of consumers before the first independent lab test result entered a federal courthouse. By the time that result became fully public, the brand had already completed its peak, signed its biggest sponsorships, and begun its decline. What the documents leave open is not whether Prime's products were safe or unsafe. That determination belongs to the courts and the regulators whose proceedings are ongoing. The question now remains: what oversight mechanism exists between the moment a creator decides to launch a consumer product and the moment that product reaches a federal court filing? The answer, in Prime's case, is the same answer the documents keep returning to. There was none that operated on the relevant timescale. The market moved faster than the institutions watching it. It usually does. The 31 pence price tag is what that gap looks like when the numbers